I love when I think of how this played out with Luther and Melanchthon. They really just got back to, what does the Bible say? Let's get back to the original languages and let's scrutinize this book and see what it says. So that's a healthy place to start, is showing people from the Bible where the gospel is, what the punchline of our faith is, what's central to who we are as humans. What does it mean to be a human, to live in relation to God and to other people? How does that play out when we interact with others day to day, on our job, with our families? And we start from that place up, and then we can start dropping in there some, theological terms. But first, let's start with the Bible. Let's get people asking questions about, what does it mean to be a human? How do you live before God and others? And then we say, while we're there, while we're visiting the Bible just on its own terms, in its proper context, can I also talk to you about the way the church has always thought and talked about these things? So a lot of times we have to go backwards. I want to highlight to you how a lot of the things you distrust are contemporary ideas. But let's go back to see how the church has understood Christianity from its origins. This isn't some creative, cool way of doing Christianity. No, this is an attempt to get back to the faith once for all delivered to the saints.
You are listening to the Gird Up Podcast, an unapologetically Lutheran voice for the ordinary Christian. Our guest today is the artist Flame, and we'll get to him in just a moment. But before we do that, I would like to encourage you to be a part of the movement to flood the internet with confessional content yourself. Please hit follow or subscribe and leave a rating and review on whatever platform you're listening to this podcast. And make sure you share this episode with someone who needs a community just like this one. If you'd like to support the work we do here at Gird Up, please consider making a donation. We call it a cup of coffee donation, because for the price of a cup of coffee, you can help fund the ministry we're doing here at Gird Up as we flood the internet with confessional content and help prepare the people of God for whatever lies ahead. Go to www.girdupministries.com, select buy us a cup of coffee in the main menu, and make your donation there. If you want to stay connected, sign up for the Gird Up Dispatch, our weekly email with updates, resources, and encouragement to help you stand firm in Christ. You'll find a sign-up link in the show notes as well. And finally, if you've got questions or topics you want us to address or guests you want to hear me interview, please send those suggestions my way via the link in the show notes. Now, with all that said, pull up a chair and let's talk about Jesus for a while. Today's guest is a man who has spent 2 decades at the intersection of faith and hip-hop. He is a Grammy-nominated artist, the founder of Extra Nos Academy. We'll talk about what that is in just a moment. He's a graduate of Concordia Seminary in St. Louis. He's grounded in the work of the Church Fathers and the Lutheran Confessions, and now he's using his platform to push back against spiritual anxiety and point people to the objective comfort that Jesus is enough. Welcome to the show, Flame.
Yes, indeed. Glad to be here with you, my friend.
Dude, I'm excited to have this conversation. I've been listening to you for quite a while. Actually, I was probably listening to you before you even started to make the shift toward Lutheranism. And then around the time, so I went back to school so I was a teacher in inner city Milwaukee. I went back to school in 2020 to start studying to become a pastor. And so it was kind of interesting then to suddenly see, like, I'm talking about this stuff in class and your music is making it clear, like, oh, somebody else is also studying the same things kind of parallel to it. So I very much have enjoyed your music over the last several years, and the more you put out, the more I wanted to talk to you about it. So I'm pumped to have this conversation. Glad to have you on.
Man, that's exciting to hear. Yeah, I'm equally excited. Thank you again for reaching out. Yeah, it's been a fun journey, and God has been kind, but a lot of twists and turns along the way.
Yeah. Do you mind? Why don't we start off? Why don't you tell us a little bit of your story for anybody who's not familiar with you? What would your elevator pitch be if somebody said, who is Flame? What are you up to?
Yes, indeed. So in short, Flame is my artist name. My given name is Marcus Gray. I am a native from St. Louis, Missouri, And yeah, I grew up in the inner city, always influenced by Christianity, Christian thought via my mom and my grandmother. So my grandmother really was the strongest pillar in my family in terms of the faith. She gave me actually the clever idea of she saw my natural interest in rap music, hip hop culture, and she would catch me listening to the most vile, debased version of rap music. And one day she said, "Grandson, why don't you study your schoolwork, write songs about the things you learn, and then when you go to school, you've committed the concepts and ideas to memory because you've written songs about the things you've engaged." And in that moment, Flame was born. I was like, genius. So she sort of gave me the concept for edutainment is kind of the way I've heard it phrased. And yeah, so I've really taken that concept and built on it. She's now with the Lord, but I'm in her debt for just taking this thing that was most natural for me and helping me direct it and manage it in a way that was productive and yeah, even glorifying to God. So thank you, Francis Jones. So that's really me. I like to communicate God's word, ancient Christianity, confessional Lutheran thought in rap format. And that leads the way to also writing books and podcasting and connecting with people, helping to bridge the gap between lofty theology and the everyday, mundane, boring aspect of life to see how God is faithful through and through. So that's really me in a nutshell.
I love it. I love it. You mentioned books and podcasting. Why don't we just put that up there now? What if people want to consume more of you, where can they find it?
Yeah, so I have a podcast titled The Study Boys. Is with my friend Lex Lutheran and myself. So we just really react to contemporary things, scholars, as well as pop culture stuff, and we talk about theology and scripture through that sort of filter. I also have a personal podcast. It's Extra Nos Academy is the name of the podcast. So there I'm just unpacking, sort of those core confessions of the faith: baptism, the Lord's Supper, justification by faith alone, that kind of thing. And yeah, so that's pretty fun. My music is everywhere where music is streamed and sold. And yeah, the books are out there. Shout out to Concordia Publishing House. My first book, Extra Nos, Discovering Grace Outside of Myself. And the most recent second book, Because Jesus Taught It, Christianity Through the Eyes of the Church Fathers. So it's a lot of stuff out there to consume.
Yeah, so I haven't personally had a chance to read your second book yet, although a buddy of mine just texted me the other day and said that he read it and he loved it. So I'm excited to put that on the shelf as well. You've got a really approachable style that I appreciate. But I like to read books when I'm doing my plasma donations, and I'm working through Extra Nos right now, and very much appreciating that too. I'll be honest, when I sat down to read it, I sat down kind of doing the podcast prep, like speed read through. I'm sure you're familiar with that, and I ended up just taking a deep breath and slowing down. And, you know what? I just want to read this, and I'm walking through it. I appreciate it. The fun thing too is, having been familiar with a few of your albums before I started listening to Extra Nos, your podcast, is to hear samples of some of your podcast episodes in the album was kind of fun and surprising too. So it's cool how you're tying all those things together.
Yeah, definitely try to cross brand them to point everyone to each next thing, because these concepts and ideas are ones you have to mull over and hear them said in different ways. So it gets at it in multiple angles and helps it sink in and soak. So I think that's it kind of works together in that way. But that's encouraging to hear. Thank you for checking out the book. And yeah, that's I try to make the style user friendly, so to speak, where it's not too heady, but it's also something for you to engage that's worthwhile. So that delicate dance, hopefully it shows up in the writing.
Love it. Love it. Now you write and talk pretty extensively about your upbringing, kind of in like Reformed Baptist theology. And a lot of the work you do in Lutheran theology is, correct me if I'm wrong, but it kind of seems like it's pretty targeted against, like specifically to those, the teachings that you kind of came out of. And I'm curious, well, yeah, I'll let you talk about that a little bit. Is it, um, yeah, I guess, do you mind mapping out your path a little bit? Coming from, you said you grew up Christian, so coming from that background to then Lutheranism, and what your relationship is then maybe with the denominations or the theology that you came out of?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say for sure, I grew up just generic American Christianity, sort of, grabbing a bunch of things, hodgepodge sort of version of Christianity, just as a kid. And a lot of good foundational things were there. Again, kudos to my grandmother. She really helped catechize me as a little kid, taught me about the Trinity, because in my community, the Nation of Islam was very active, very present. So she wanted, myself and my cousins to be equipped to defend our faith, because those guys would be out on the corners where we walking home from school. You'll see guys out with bean pies and the fez, the little hat that they wear and the bow tie, and they're passing out the final call, and they would engage us kids on the way home from school, like, hey, do you know the truth? Do you know about Allah? And that kind of thing. So my grandmother knew that was something we needed to be equipped to do. So I remember defending my faith as a kid, talking about the Trinity to these grown men. So that was fun. And so that started me off. And then when I really took my faith more seriously was when my grandmother passed when I was 16 years old. And I became a member of a local church. It was a full gospel Baptist Church, which is a denomination led by a gentleman by the name of Paul S. Morton, and it's a blend between Baptist and Pentecostal. So I believe his parents were both. So his dad was Baptist, his mom was Pentecostal, and he learned to appreciate certain things from both of them, and he started this denomination as he got older. So I was in that space for 5 years at 16 years old. Then I got a hold of Reformed theology, Calvinism, through a Christian rap group by the name of Cross Movement. So these were older guys who were doing Christian rap. They were very skilled and talented. And just as a young teen, I was drawn to that style of music culturally. But the fact that they included theology and scripture in it really drew me. So I was like, man, this is really cool. Long story short, as I was also doing music, I was a fan, and I went to a concert in Chicago, found out that they were there, got a chance to meet them, gave them my demo. They liked it and reached out to me, and I went on tour with them for 2 months. And for that 2 month stretch, they pretty much, man, just, I guess, put the pressure on and really caused me to think about church history and the Reformation. I had no clue that those categories even existed. I remember they asked me, are you a Calvinist or are you an Arminian? And I'm like, are these different gangs? Or like, are you a Crip or a Blood? I thought that's what they was asking me. And I'm like, no, I
It's
just
not
follow
far off.
Jesus. I don't, I'm like, I just follow Jesus. I have no idea. But they were really pushing me towards, Reformed thought, Calvinism. And when I left the tour, I started my first semester in Bible college. But it was sort of a crisis, because I'm like, man, is my school Calvinistic? Is my family Calvinistic? Because the way they pitched it was, this was true Christianity. This was the highest expression of Christianity in the land. They would say they had the purest exegesis, the purest hermeneutic, which is basically how to approach your Bible and get the good from it. They said they had the best expression of that. So now I'm in this pseudo crisis, wondering, was my entire Christian journey up to that point fake? Was it real? What about my grandmother, who's now with the Lord? She wasn't a Calvinist. So I went into this panic, and so it was difficult. It was a low point, but the school, I found out, was heavily influenced by Reformed thought, the Calvinistic Baptist version. So I really leaned in, and I found my home there for 18 years, and a lot of good came out of it. I learned about Luther there, and I was drawn to him. But they sort of give you Luther and then tuck him away, and John Calvin becomes the hero, the savior of Christianity. And that's the rhetoric and the mindset that I bought into. And over time, those ideas started to wane as certain doctrines began to conflict with just my everyday lived experience. Just for example, this idea that Jesus did not die for everyone without exception. So he only died for a select few is what they taught us. And then they teach you how to find that idea in the Bible. I will argue wrongly, but they find a way to get to it. And over time, that idea starts to bear down. At first, it sounds like great news. Wow, Jesus died uniquely, specially for me, especially if you're a person looking for sort of identity and that nearness to God, you really feel special. And but then you start to ask the question as you see your own hypocrisy, your own disintegration within yourself, your own sins and failures, you say, man, am I one of those ones? I don't see the type of consistency that I used to see. I'm getting further away from my conversion or my testimony experience, and I'm not as good of a guy as I thought. And now the insecurity, the fear sets in. And that's what happened to me. It pushed me to a point of despair. I didn't know if I was a Christian. I didn't know if God was tired of me. And I started asking deeper questions at that point.
Yeah. So it's an interesting it's an interesting dynamic. I don't think it's one that's particularly rare. Although I think for some reason we don't think it happens. But for somebody whose career at that point, right, is all about sharing the gospel, whether it's formal ministry or not, right? That's what your whole life is about, right? To then come to
Yep.
this crisis of faith. Did you ever consider just like not making music anymore, or shifting like more into the secular music realm at all, like while you're going through this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do remember sort of pushing pause on the music because I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to write about. I didn't want to continue to export those ideas out into the world because man, I realized the reach that the music has, specifically Christian rap. I mean, in terms of its influence for those people who like to think about the American revivals, if you find value in that conversation, I would say Christian rap needs to be in that conversation with the great awakenings and those kinds of things because man, it really gripped an entire community of people, black and brown and white alike, and got people interested in church planting, Bible college, evangelism. It was just this huge, major thing that was going on. And my goodness, I was a part of that. But then I did realize if these ideas aren't really biblical, if they aren't actually helpful in the end overall, well, God can take two fish and five loaves and feed the masses. He can make a donkey speak. He can make the rocks cry out. So, can he use a thing? For sure. But is it his desired outcome? I would argue perhaps not in terms of the full picture of what's communicated over there. So I was nervous to continue to, yeah, export those concepts. So I did press pause. I did wonder even if I should continue to be a Christian. I had got that low. And I was like, man, I don't want to go to Rome. I've been frightened to even consider that, right? Because there's not much consideration of Rome even being brothers and sisters in the faith. I didn't want to go to any like Armenian or just sort of generic American denomination because I had been frightened to believe that they also may not really be family in the faith, maybe cousins, definitely not brothers and sisters, maybe third cousins in the faith kind of thing. And so yeah, it put me at a place where I was like, well, if there's no place to go, then maybe I'll just be a good guy, like a spiritual nomad. And so that was tricky for me. That was really tricky. But I mean, man, I got a random phone call. So funny. A random phone call from a close friend of mine who was at a Calvinistic seminary in California, and he reached out to me and he said, "Hey man, my church history professor here recommended this school called Concordia Seminary to me because he was considering further education. And he said, if you want to get a really robust grasp of church history, when you go back to your hometown, because he's from St. Louis as well, he's like, make sure you check out this school called Concordia Seminary." So he's telling me this story. He was like, maybe you want to check it out too. So I kind of looked at it like a Hail Mary, like, all right, this is my final attempt at this Christian thing because I don't know. I'm scared. I'm nervous. So I reached out to the school. I scheduled a time to tour the campus, and I didn't know what was ahead. But in that sort of desperation was when I sort of started to peer into maybe there's something else out there. Let's go explore.
Yeah. I will also I'll pay you another compliment and say um it's refreshing, frankly, and definitely noticeable just how careful you are about being respectful of the churches you grew up in, the places that you studied, and even in your disagreement. I mean, the subtext of everything you just said about like questioning your faith is that your understanding now is different, and you consider them brothers and sisters in the faith, even if you disagree with them theologically. And then, I mean, frankly, even like some um some of your music, like in your book too, but some of your music is really pointed about like what you're teaching is false doctrine. Like this is not right. And you call them out. I think like Secret is Out, right? There's no, it is so bold. It's in your face. This is wrong. The preacher is tweaking the word, right? At the same
Yeah.
time, you're so very considerate and respectful of the work that they're doing. How do you explain that dynamic and your approach to this kind of apologetics?
Yeah, that's that's good. Thank you. That's encouraging to hear. I do realize that both things can be true. I do feel like God has been faithful throughout this entire stretch, and these are the people, the places, and the pockets He's used to nurture my faith. In that way, He's been a good father to allow me to encounter people and places where He shows up. And whether I like the way it panned out perfectly, I have to acknowledge that He's been kind to just put me with good people in each one of these pit stops that have contributed to my faith, that have made sure that, yeah, I've had good accountability and encouragement. So I have to acknowledge that wholeheartedly and fully and give them that due credit, as well as I think that tells the truth about what God has been up to. But then, yeah, I also have to be honest to say, man, a lot of the ideas have holes in them, and we should have the kind of family oriented dynamic where we can have vigorous discussion. You should know by now I'm your brother. I love you beyond our disagreements because I know you care for me. And a lot of people we're still friends. We still have funny exchanges, rigorous discussion, but I think by now there's trust that's been established enough to where they kind of say, yeah, that's Flame. That's who we know him to be, kind of thing. So I lean in on that assumption very heavily. So even when I meet people that I've sort of stepped away from in thinking, I think we can still have that spirited discussion and be family and friends. But ultimately, I did want to deconstruct the ideas. And I'm catching my cues from Paul and the apostles who were raised to think about the world and religiosity in one way, and then they get in the weeds of showing those distinctives and the differences between these worldviews and approaches to existing before God and existing before people. So I'm catching my cues from Luther, who had a similar burden. He's heavily, entrenched in a way of understanding Christianity. Then he sort of sees something one day and he says, "Wait, that's a major difference, and it's problematic." So he goes into this obsession with deconstructing this unhealthy idea and presenting as best he can the purity of what's been revealed in Scripture. So I'm like, I have to take the same approach. I think oftentimes people will do the easier thing, which is they'll hear a good thing and they'll just add it to their already existing good thing. And they'll just have this mixed bag of ideas, and some may even contradict. So I'm like, I don't want that to be the result. I want people to see and notice where these sneaky ideas camp out, where these ideas hang out that go unnoticed and detected that actually rob faith and they rob trust in the Lord and his finished work for us. And in that way, um, you start to say, I'm not crazy. When I left Sunday service feeling like trash, and they gave me the gospel, but somehow I felt like it was taken away. And I left feeling like I have to go harder this week. What was that? And I want to put language and verbiage and ideas to those concepts to say, that's where these tricky things hang out. And I've been around long enough to see a lot of my friends who came up underneath those same ideas. They were formed in the same reformed thought as myself. now as they've aged, many, and it's sad to say, many have actually went through a similar crisis as me, but they didn't land in the same place. Many of them have decided, there is no God. There is no Christianity. These are fairy tales and they're false ideas, and they're very hostile to Christianity now. And my goodness, you would have never imagined years ago just seeing how pious and devout they were. I mean, these men and women were leading Bible studies. They were pastors. We were in the trenches together, but to see them now say that there is no God, it's heartbreaking. So things like that, my own sort of spiritual trauma, and people that are very close to me, and public figures, and laypersons alike, who now believe there is no God. It's just sad to see. So I'm like, I can't shy away from the seriousness of bad ideas and how over time they can rear the ugly face and show to be the little lamb formed from the dragon in the book of Revelation, aka the false prophet that exists only to deceive the saints. I'm like, I can't shy away from that thing's presence. And so yeah, that's sort of my task in my mind.
That's so well said. I think you brought up two things I would love to explore a little bit. The first is this idea that most American Christians are just kind of collecting ideas that sound good to them. I remember, I don't know if you've ever read anything by Stephen Mansfield, but he wrote a book called The Faith of the American Soldier. And it was the first time I was kind of exposed to that idea. And he didn't present it necessarily positively as a whole. He presented it positively from the perspective of like, at least like millennials are engaging with the world spiritually. But that idea of I'm just kind of walking through the world collecting these spiritual ideas that I like, and I don't really um I think it's a result. This is my theory, but I think it's a result of this idea that it's like my faith is so personal to me. I'm surprised even sometimes when I interact with other Christians who almost get offended. Like, why are you asking me about my faith? That's personal. And as somebody, as a cradle Lutheran, I go, personal? Like, this is the church, right? And so it's interesting that you brought that idea up, and it's definitely a thing with millennials, and especially kind of the younger millennials like us in our generation. That seems to be something that's more of an American thing than any other. And then to go along with that, you brought up that word deconstruction, right? And as Christians, we get all panicky about that word deconstruction, and to some degree for good reason, because we've heard a lot of people use that term deconstruction, and then just like you were talking about, they disappear from the faith, they disappear from church, they even often disappear from our lives, because as they reject the faith, they also reject those who hold to the faith, right? But I would argue, as a Lutheran, you should be constantly deconstructing anything and everything all the time. And to put it in my own words, I would say being Lutheran means to never be afraid to test my ideas and my convictions, because the Lutheran faith is nothing other than the historic Christian faith stripped down to just pure doctrine, right? That's how Luther got there. That's how, that's how 100 years ago, that's how the Wells got there. That's how the Missouri Synod has done the absolutely unthinkable and like essentially put their foot down and move the ship back in a confessional direction. And now you see, I think it's the PCA doing the same thing. Like, churches don't become more conservative. They just don't, until suddenly they do. And it's this process that makes them do that. Can you speak a little bit more to I guess that process of just picking up things in my own faith, in my own life, and examining them and deciding whether I'm going to hold on to them or not? How did you get there? It sounds like you were already doing that before you ever went back to seminary, which is where a lot of people learn to do that. So why you and not everybody else, I guess, first? And then how do you decide and determine what things you're going to examine and when and how and so forth?
Yeah, man, that's yeah, very insightful stuff. I think, yeah, wow. When I think, firstly, I had this out of the blue experience that led up to everything. I was at a concert in Jamaica, in Kingston, Jamaica, and was on a university campus, and it was hundreds of people there, maybe a little over 1,000, something like that. And yeah, all college students. And at this time, I was Reformed Baptist. If I was Reformed for 18 years, this had to be year 16 or 15 or 16, something like that. So I'm on stage doing what I normally do every day, and I looked at the crowd, and in between songs, I like to talk and just kind of share. And I had this thought. I wanted to tell everyone that Jesus died for them out of nowhere. So this was something I had dismissed from my mind for, 15, 16 years at that point. So there was no reason for that desire to come up. It should have been quieted and silenced, but it came up. And I looked at the crowd and I wanted to say, Jesus died for each one of you, but I couldn't. And I sort of choked in my spiel because I got a bit emotional on stage. And I was like, man, Lord, just kind of, because I'm rapping at the same time. I'm having this conversation in my head, but I'm rapping, I'm talking, and I just really felt bad. I felt like I disappointed God, like I did something wrong. So even after the concert, I felt convicted. I prayed, I asked God, man, is that wrong? Forgive me. And I needed to explore, where did that come from? So just sort of, it was random. So then fast forward, that's one of the things that I started to really dig into was, again, on a personal level, am I one of the elect? Did Jesus die for everyone? I started to really camp out there. But what was helpful was when I visited the campus, I tested into the master's program, and I didn't say much about being an artist. I didn't say much about being Flame. In fact, I didn't say anything. It only got out because one of the students told one of the professors, but I think that's this guy, Flame, this Christian rap guy. But no, so I just, every day I would come to class, and I remember my first class was Lutheran Mind, and it was with Dr. Okamoto and Dr. Maxwell, and they were just talking about Luther's concept of being a theologian of glory versus a theologian of the cross. And as a good Calvinist at the time, I'm like, God is all about his glory. The good guy is the theologian of glory. That's right. So then I put an answer on a pop quiz about that. And it was obviously wrong. It was like the theologian of glory is the bad guy. And I'm like, how could this be? But the thing was, when there are these attempts to speak where the Bible is silent, there are these attempts to answer questions that God in his infinite wisdom has not saw fit to expose. He wants us to confront him in Christ Jesus, not to confront him as raw God. And so in that way, that's what really got me to say, I need to just humble myself. I'm not going to talk much about Calvinism. I'm not going to debate with the professors. And that's what I did. And I started just thinking through, did Jesus die for everyone? What is justification by faith? Who is justification for? And so, yeah, then that led to conversations about the sacraments. I started to see that the sacraments were friends with justification by faith alone. In fact, the sacraments deliver this justification that Jesus earned for all without exception. So it became this contrast between worldviews. Man, there's so much articulation of God's kindness and his grace and his drive to get us the forgiveness of sins in all these diverse ways. And just on a basic level, I like that. That sounded like good news, like a God I wanted to be around and to get to know, versus this other God who's withholding salvation from everyone without exception, who's made the sacraments a symbol, just another moment for you to think in your head about how good he is and how good you should be, another moment to just reflect intellectually. So the two arrangements of Christianity started to really show themselves, and I had to dig in deeper to contrast them two. And that's when I started to see, man, this is very helpful. And then as I would have these conversations with my pastor friends, with friends who are lay leaders, and I asked these potent questions, I started to see that they didn't really have answers for the things that I was considering. And they were bright, brilliant men and women, but I think they were more indoctrinated versus educated. So they hadn't even engaged these things. They hadn't been exposed to the Lutheran Reformation. They didn't know much, respectfully. And I was like, man, there's so much more to know. The things that we hadn't considered. And to me, that's where it all started. And then other people that were having similar crises started to go down that path. So that's kind of how it started for me. And to your point about just sort of now millennials just taking the good wherever it is, I think that's relevant because people feel hurt and crushed by ideas that have shown to not stand the test of time. And I think that they've defaulted to, I'm not going to trust in big systems anymore. I'm not going to trust in big ideas, these meta narratives that have explanations for all things. And they've sort of given up on that idea, and they've settled for, I'm just going to take little pieces of good wherever it is, kind of mix it up and have my gumbo soup of ideas as I do life. And I can understand why that seems like comfort and safety. But ultimately, it's you making yourself the determiner, the arbiter of truth, and you feel safe trusting yourself. And that really is the idea from even mainstream society. It's don't trust big ideas, don't trust government, don't trust science. Just find decent, good information on YouTube about different topics and shape your own way of doing life. And I think a lot of millennials and Gen Zers think that way now. And I can see why it feels like a comfortable pit stop as you're trying to find ultimate truth and ultimate reality, but it's going to let you down as well because it's just a band-aid and it's not a real solution. But I do understand, I'm sympathetic to how it feels like a good place to camp out, at least while you can get your bearings and get stable footing to continue to go forward. So I think that's the spirit of the day that we really have to contend with. So we have to be sympathetic to a lot of people's exhaustion with power and structure and systems, but we have to let them know ultimately you can't give up on these good things, though. I understand taking a breather, but come back with renewed energy because truth matters. Ideas have consequences. And we need to think about, what are we thinking? What are we holding fast to? And will it last? And will it hold us all the way until the Lord returns or we perish?
Yeah. Yeah, the way I like to think about it, and this isn't every analogy limps, right? But the way I like to think about it is like if you're dying of thirst, and you're out in the middle of a desert and you're dying of thirst and you come upon a river, you don't stop and think like, gee, I wonder how clean this water is. You just stick your head in and you drink deeply, right? And that water will save your life. But once the Culligan man shows up and you have clean water, you'd be a fool to keep drinking from that dirty water, right? And so then you start working your way upstream, or you ought to start working your way upstream. And the closer you get to the headwaters, the purer that water is going to be. And frankly, there might be a couple of different churches that are pretty close to the headwaters. And I'm convicted that mine is there, right? You should be convicted that yours is there. You mentioned earlier, right? The Bible college that you were at, they were convinced that what they were teaching was the truth. And you darn well better be convinced that what you're teaching is the truth, right? So you come to those convictions, but you have to then constantly be testing and looking around and guessing and not guessing, like assessing what is it that I'm consuming, and am I consuming what's pure, or am I consuming something that's been tainted by something else? So I guess my question for you then is, how do we, I think, well, I mean, the two of us having a conversation, I think we're both unique in this regard, that in, our 20s, all of a sudden, so, I won't, I don't want to go through my whole story either, but for myself, I mean, when I started teaching in Milwaukee, I lived on Hubbard and Meineke in Milwaukee, during the Buffum Street revival. The Buffum Street boys were going a little bit nuts. Things were rough. And, obviously I'm a white guy that grew up out in the country, living in the hood, and looking at the church that I'm going to and going, why is the neighborhood almost 100% black? My students are 100% black, and my church is almost 100% white. And so I started going to church I would go to my Lutheran church on Sunday morning, and then I'd go down the street and go to Ephesians Missionary Baptist or a couple of the other ones that were around. And what I was hearing was frankly excellent. And what I was seeing was people that were living out their faith in a way that I had never quite seen before, and that was really attractive to me. And I started this journey of like trying to find, I knew, coming from a good Lutheran family, the son of an excellent Lutheran pastor, I knew I couldn't just leave to something even that was just as good. I had to find a church that was better than the church I came from. And in order to do that, I had to really start reading doctrinal statements and statements of faith and things like that from other churches. But then I also needed to make sure I understood my Lutheran doctrine and theology, and the better I understood it, then all of a sudden I found myself going right back into Lutheranism, right? So my sojourn didn't last for very long. I read myself right back into Lutheranism, but it seems to be fairly unique for people in their 20s or early 30s to be asking those kinds of questions and being that intentional. And I hear that intentionality in your story. There's certainly intentionality in mine. How do we get people to start asking these questions so that they can start moving closer to the truth?
Yeah, that is the task. That's the difficult part. It's always helpful if a person is there already. They're exhausted, they're tired, they've expressed disappointment with certain ideas or even the way they see church life playing out. Those are easier cases. It's more difficult when people are very comfortable in a certain space. Especially in the context I came up in, like a lot of people who are in, apostate Christianity. They're in denominations that don't mention Jesus much. They don't value the Bible. The gospel rarely shows up. If they do, the Lord's Supper or communion is once every 6 months, and they love it because the pastor's telling them how this is your year and God's gonna, heal you and fill you and thrill you and he won't even kill you, right? So they just get all the kind of good news that they want to hear. And, so those are harder. But I think that one, I do think that's why we have to sort of be the annoying community of people that is pointing out where the gospel is not being taught, where there is false hope. And we have to be clear about those things. I think one, we do that with starting with the Bible because most people value something about the Bible. They may not value the name Luther. His name may be offensive to them. And that's unfortunate. But some people, when they hear you say Lutheran, they get frightened. They say, oh, you're the cousin of Rome. And they don't want anything to do with you because they think you're Roman Catholic light or diet. So really it's just, I love when I think of how this played out with Luther and his cohort Melanchthon. They really just got back to what does the Bible say? Let's get back to the original languages and let's scrutinize this book and see what it says. So that's a healthy place to start, is showing people from the Bible where the gospel is, what the punchline of our faith is, what's central to who we are as humans. What does it mean to be a human, to live in relation to God and to other people? How does that play out when we interact with others day to day, on our job, with our families? And we start from that place up, and then we can start dropping in there some, theological terms. But first, let's start with the Bible. Let's get people asking questions about what does it mean to be a human? How do you live before God and others? And then we say, while we're visiting the Bible just on its own terms, in its proper context, can I also talk to you about the way the church has always thought and talked about these things? So a lot of times we have to go backwards because I want to highlight to you how a lot of the things you distrust are contemporary ideas. But let's go back to see how the church has understood Christianity from its origins. And I think that's another helpful thing that I saw from Luther. His concept was to show I'm not trying to strum up some new sect. This isn't some creative, cool way of doing Christianity, and I think everybody's gotten it wrong. Follow me. No, this is an attempt to get back to the faith once for all delivered to the saints. So that's a helpful approach today, is going back to the scriptures, going back to church history, showing how the early church thought about the gospel and how God delivers that gospel through baptism, and how he sustains the purity of our faith in the Lord's Supper, and how God is for us in these ways. And this has always inspired the church to do good in the world, to care for the homeless, the widows, the poor, the sick. These were expressions that were naturally born out of a pure exposition of the gospel. Now, is church history pristine and perfect? Of course not. But there are cool consensus that we should observe and at least mimic and copy, that we have to bring to contemporary times. And these are approaches that I found to be helpful with people who are disillusioned by Christianity, disillusioned by religion altogether. It's like, let's go back to a pure expression of these things from the Bible, from the early church, and see if we can learn something that will help us move forward. These have been approaches that I've seen that have been really helpful.
Yeah, I would love to see just Lutherans at large be more conversant in the church fathers. Not that I'm even particularly conversant in them, but you see it and you hear it. And the same thing with the original languages, too. You see and hear it in other denominations, and not across the board, but often it's more of a soundbite approach. So to be able to be conversant in them and not with that soundbite approach, not like finding a quote from Augustine that seems like it supports my argument. Sometimes it's not even related, but I threw it in there for some credibility, that kind of stuff, right? To be conversant in it so that we can meet those arguments, which are very strong in a lot of people's minds and hearts, and be able to address them. Like ownership, that extreme ownership of my own theology and faith is something we could latch onto and learn.
Yeah, that's a fact. And if I could add one more thing, and this may be a rabbit trail, but another thing that's I think is very helpful for people that are stuck and kind of camping out in this hodgepodge expression of faith, or they don't know where to go, and they're tempted to just become just a moralistic, just a good person out there. I think it's helpful, as you mentioned, to revisit our confessions and to see, yeah, just those who are in the Lutheran space or not. I think it's helpful to visit the Book of Concord. If nothing else, see it as church history, almost like the first systematic theology, if you will, for those who think in those terms. Um, because once you start getting into pure expressions of exposition of Christianity, for me, one of the things that was really helpful was the doctrine of vocation. Because a lot of times people settle for, I'm just going to do good in the world, because religiosity leads to the bad, to the divisive, and it ends up ostracizing and dividing people, and it proves to not be helpful. For people who got stuck in that pocket, I would like for you to consider the true understanding of how God is engaging his world as the byproduct of this forgiveness that we receive freely from Christ, that pushes us out to go now love and serve freely. So in that way, I love how now being in this space that the doctrine of vocation has been highlighted, as opposed to the version of Christianity that says, live with this vertical focus. Your primary concern is to be staying squeaky clean, staying away from sin, staying away from mainstream music, mainstream movies, going out and being around sinners. But stay safe, stay focused on being extra pious, which being pious is beautiful, but being preoccupied with your own personal piety can become a distraction and can make you sort of disconnected from people. But understanding Christianity rightly, I will argue, as a confessional Lutheran, does show well in how we show up for other people. And I think that's an attractive thing for people to see is, man, you guys do care about social causes. You guys are invested in doing good in the world beyond a didactic breakdown of Bible and theology, and even vocation, just showing how God values the good as well, even if it's not preachy good. If it's caring for your family, caring for your friends, and serving community, those are good things that God values. Those are ways in which He nurtures and protects for His world. He uses our prayers for other people to engage and work in the world. So in that way, that's a helpful thing, and a defense of the faith is just good vocation, using the arts, not being afraid to be creative and show the different expressions and styles in which truth can take form to infiltrate people's imaginations and the way that they see the world, and that kind of thing is also friendly with the truth. It's in fact God's idea to be creative and colorful and to help truth land softly on a person's heart. So I think these are beautiful apologetics for engaging the world when you help people see where the truth leads. It leads to creativity, it leads to action, it leads to good works and serving people. And we have to really lean into that those I guess that extra artillery in the arsenal, because it's really helpful in just displaying God and His goodness and His care for the world, you know?
Yeah. Oh, and I'm growing more and more passionate about it. And I can't wait to talk about that with you in just a moment. But before we go there, I want to talk about race a little bit too. So I'll just ask, what has your experience been like in Lutheranism as a Black man? Now, the Missouri Synod traditionally is a far more urban synod than either the Wells or the ELS, but still very much a German denomination, a very white denomination generally. And so I'd like to first know, what's your experience been like? And then do you see it as a problem, or like, how do you see that kind of well, let's start there. I won't throw too many questions at you at once. What's your
Yeah.
experience been like as a Black man in the Lutheran church?
Yeah, man, it's so funny. So, in one sense, it's an unfair question because I was sort of detoxed from my time in the reform space, with this that sort of expectation for Black culture and style of singing and style and formation of liturgy. So it's kind of like the cheat code is I was confronted with this culture shock as a person moving into the reform space, because it's very similar. And so there is where most of the shock was. That's when I first experienced a predominantly white community of Christians, that were really thinking about their faith. And yes, the style of service was very different. So there is where I had to learn how to understand this new culture and how to navigate it, and obviously still be myself and bring myself fully to the table. So, but having moved into the Lutheran space, it's similar, but a lot of the shock has been absorbed when I first started in a reform space. But what I will say though is I like that, unique to the Lutherans is the reality that, earlier on, Lutherans have been friendly as best they could, right? Wherever humans are, they're going to be inconsistencies and things like that. But a lot of the history of Lutherans in America, um, has some cool parts and touch points with helping the African American community. So that was really cool to learn about earlier on. Just Civil War times where Lutherans were friendly towards the Black cause. That was cool to learn about. I learned about the first Rosa Young, and how Lutherans had a part in coming alongside of her and, yeah, really taking Christian education seriously. In fact, W.E.B. Du Bois knew about the Lutherans. And when she wrote a letter to him to ask for help with her efforts to build schools for Black kids, he was like, "You probably want to check with those Lutherans. They really are into that education thing." So the fact that that reputation had risen to the top, so to speak, and that it was just default recommendation for him spoke very well in terms of the work that they were doing in the African American community. So learning about that early on was like, man, kudos to the Lutherans, man. These German, Scandinavian, Norwegian brothers and sisters who have tried to make good efforts in that way. So I think that's unique. I think that's unique to Lutherans, because other denominations have a more dirtier history with blacks in that way. So I like that. So that was number one. I was like, man, cool. And I think then on a ground level, it was like, man, okay, so these hymns, these hymnals. I don't know how to read through a hymnal. So it was kind of this humorous part. I remember kind of people would read and they would be skipping lines and going down to the next stanza. And I'm like, how do you follow this thing? This is weird, you know? So just sort of those little subtle differences I had to learn in divine service. But I did also learn that there is a cool history with Black Lutherans in the Bible Belt. Though I will say, I haven't seen how active they've been online and social media and sort of moving into the millennial and Gen Z way of doing life in Christianity. I think it would be super cool to collaborate with them if ever there was an opportunity to yeah, sort of to revisit the passion that was established with Black Lutherans. But I'm happy that they're there. So that was cool to see that there was already, from a structural standpoint, a collection of Black Lutherans. So that was another thing that I found favorable to the Lutheran space. But I will say that there is a need for more Lutheran Black pastors. I would love to see people get a hold of the Book of Concord. I don't know if there will be any cradle Black Lutheran pastors within the next 5 years. They have to be born and grow up. But I would love to see converts to Lutheran thought get a hold of the Book of Concord, maintain their sort of evangelical reflexes for reaching the community and using the arts, but having this sound understanding. Not that they aren't sound in their own ways, but this sort of fuller expression of soundness. I would love to see more Black pastors get a hold of that and plant churches or move into already existing churches. I think there's a need for that. I think we need more podcasters and influencers. I would love to see the Lutheran educational system implement ways to train up the Gen Zers and millennials in sound doctrine and theology, and teach them how to be podcast hosts. Teach them how to be good lay leaders. Teach them how to be good TikTokers where they can do Christian apologetics in their fun, cool way. If they're dancing or doing whatever, but just finding ways to incorporate truth and entertainment in a way my grandmother really helped me form. I think we need spaces for those kind of things that can reach people in a Black community, people in a brown community who are used to seeing those elements a part of the way they think about Christianity, versus just one that's more focused on higher learning and education. We need that. But I think if we can have ways in which it trickles down, or if that's offensive, and ways in which it flourishes or expresses itself more artistically, then I think that would be a helpful thing to draw more Black and brown people into this beautiful thing that's been preserved in the Lutheran space. It has to happen. I pray I'm part of that kind of shift. My friends and myself, where we really take that seriously, that we see it as our vocation as Lutherans. One of our vocations as Lutherans is to serve other denominations within the family of God in these unique ways, because in many ways they are sort of tired and exhausted and discouraged, and they're not experiencing as much gospel light and hope as they need. So, man, we have to try to find efforts to alleviate that burden and to be a safe place for them to receive rest, but also to invite them more fully into our space, but have places where they can plug in and get going. So I know I said a lot; it's kind of random, but it's a need for it to be fully, man, visible among the Black community. A lot of people just don't know it exists. They
Yeah,
just don't know
no,
it exists.
you're absolutely right. And then from the opposite angle, right, you got a lot of white folks in Lutheranism who love the Lord and love the gospel and so forth, but they have no background or history at all interacting with Black culture, and especially the more urban Black culture, right? And whether you want to call that hip hop culture or whatever you want, right? It's not even an aversion to it, but there's just this awkward thing about it.
Yeah.
How do you handle that?
Yeah, that's good actually. I actually love that because I do think sometimes in pushes for diversity, we make it weird. Like we make it like you have to,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
like you got to start liking rap music or you got to start. It's like you actually don't. You can be yourself. You don't have to change who you are. And honestly, I think probably the best thing to do is to um yeah, find those who want to actually lead in this way. Like I don't even think you have to do it per se. But if you can partner with a personality like myself or a Delwyn Campbell, Lex Lutheran, my friend, like black and brown people who actually want to be in the front and just find ways to become friends and just have touch points. You don't even have to meet every month or every week. No, it doesn't have to be the strict kind of style, but just finding ways to be friends, be friendly, encourage one another. Like, man, I love the way you think. I love the way you write. I love the way you process. Have you considered doing that publicly? Have you considered, right? So just kind of ways of just being normal about it, not making it awkward, not taking on this huge burden that as a Germanic white male, I now need to start learning hip hop and start listening to rap. And I got to start taking a trip down to the hood every week and just sort of, hey, what's going on, guys? I want to do some cross cultural ministry. Like it doesn't have to be weird or awkward. I think it should just be good friendship, stuff like this, right? You reached out, right? We may become friends. We may keep up with each other and who knows. But yeah, just being normal, presenting ourselves friendly, things that people already do, right? This is already happening. But in terms of, getting more of this truth out there, I do think probably the intentional thing is what can we implement that would draw people in? And that's where I think, for example, one of the things I'm trying to do here in my local church is um once a month, I'm talking with my pastor now. Once a month, we talk on a topic, right? The topic could be spiritual warfare. And we'll just have, a couple of hours. We'll invite local churches to come out, the people in the community that are, interested in this kind of thing. We'll have little snacks, that kind of thing. And myself, my pastor, and my podcast host, Lex Lutheran, he'll be present via live stream, sometimes in person, right? We'll sit on a stage. We'll talk about spiritual warfare. That gives the people who are all into demonology and kind of weird about it, they get to come and talk and listen. They'll even have a mic and can ask weird, unbiblical questions, and we can engage those biblically. And people can have snacks. It's a friendly environment. We can have security if people are freaking out about that. And it's a time to just invite people in and they say, wow, those Lutheran people are actually really cool. They want to talk about relevant things. We had snacks, we hung out afterwards, and they dismissed us. And then the next month, another topic, and the next month, another topic. So now we're finding ways to invite people in on terms that they find interesting. Maybe next time we talk about movies, next time we talk about what's good and bad about mainstream music and just kind of on the ground practical stuff like that that invites people in and allows them to have a voice but also to hear things they haven't considered. And yeah, so I'm super excited for us to get that started, but these are things I've seen work already. That's the cool thing about coming into this space from the Christian rap community, from already proven concept is that these things actually work. Like right now in mainstream rap music, so many of these famous rappers reference Christian rap because over the last 20 years, Christian rap has really pushed its way into mainstream society. So now there's this bridge between Christianity and mainstream non Christians in the arts. So I'm here saying this actually works, guys. I've seen the concept proven. Let's try some of these things. So yeah, again, it's just really just being creative, having conversations, and then we do have parameters, right? We don't want to be too what is it, unionistic, where we're just you don't have to give the microphone to people to preach or teach. Got to be careful about that. So we're not opening the floodgates for trash theology to have a voice, but we're leading this. We're taking the onus on ourselves to construct an environment where we can lead, but we can bring people in to hear, and we can hear from them. So just stuff like that. I think that's really the practical, on the ground way of connecting these dots.
Yeah. Yeah, one of my favorite pet peeves to get annoyed by is churches decide, specifically for the Black community, but they decide they want to start doing outreach to the Black community. What's the first thing they do? Is they ask a couple of like middle-aged white moms to start a gospel choir. You just go, no, that will not be any good. I love you all. Please don't. Right? Please don't.
We love your passion. We love your passion. Thank you. Don't lose that.
Yep.
Don't lose that part.
Yep. Yep. But let's
Yeah.
think of some other ideas. All right. Before
Yeah.
I let you go, there's so many things I want to ask you about. We'll have to do this again sometime because I got so many more things I want to chat with
For
you
sure.
about. Before I let you go, though, I know that there's a few young men. Shout out to the boys at Kingdom Prep. I know there's a bunch of guys. There's a number of young men who are becoming Lutheran, and they really, really want to be rappers. So I'll turn it over to you. What do you have to say to them? Any encouragement you might have for them? Advice? They're listening. This is your chance to talk to them.
Yes, indeed. I love that. I love that. So one, I would say, Extra Notes Academy is an effort that I've started along with a couple of friends, and we're trying to find a structural way to help. So Extra Notes Academy has Extra Notes Music, which is the music portion where we'll be able to actually draw a lot of artists in closer just for practical advice. So be on the lookout for that. If you want to know how to record, how to write a rap, how do you get your music up on social media, all the kind of practical stuff that a new artist may not know. So stay tuned for that. But to those guys, one, I love that. I love that you're thinking about writing and expressing yourself. I would say learn about the music business. So you want to know what you're getting yourself into. What is this thing? What are the rules? So learn about the music business. I would say also think about writing from your Christian worldview. So you don't want your music to be offensive to the word of God. You don't want your music to, be the kind of music that you couldn't ride in a car and play with Jesus sitting next to you, that kind of thing. So you want to be mindful of what your message is. So think about that. Think, man, I want to contribute good to the music industry. I want to be helpful. Even if you're fun and funny and lighthearted, that's fine too. But still use your creativity constructively. So think about what kind of songs you're going to put together and how you're going to paint a good picture of God's world, paint a good picture of family, friendship, finances. Talk about all the things everybody else is talking about, but show God's good idea behind it and a constructive way to use it, because that's God's intention. We're giving us this playground to play in. So write from that spirit, right? Be informed by that approach. And then after that, then you got to get into the performance part. So you have to start learning how to be yourself in front of people. So you want to be of good character. So make sure you're practicing being a good friend, being an honest person, being lighthearted, being caring, being selfless, and thinking about other people, because that's the stuff you want to bring to the table that'll make people trust you and want to be around you, as opposed to being annoyed by you. All this is going to inform how to be an artist, how to write, and how to survive in the music industry where it's very cutthroat and mean and sharky. And you'll learn how to have thick skin without losing your soul, so to speak, without losing your, the good that God has intended with you being in the industry. So yeah, a lot to unpack, but I will say all in all, stay tuned, because we're going to have more resources to further think about these things and to get people going in the music industry. But I'm happy to hear that. Do it. Go. It's needed. We need more good Christian artists in the arts, flooding the world and making an impact for the sake of God's good message and for the sake of neighbor. That part, seriously.
Awesome. Love it. We'll make sure we put some links down in the show notes below as well. Marcus, it's been great to have you. Thank you very much for taking the time to be here. Like I said, thank you for the the way you've enriched my life with your work as well. I can't undersell that. I really do appreciate myself personally too. So
Man,
big
thank
thanks
you.
to Flame for being with us today. If you want to be a part of the Gird Up mission, you're in the right place. Hit follow or subscribe, leave a rating and review, and share this episode with someone who needs a community just like this. If you'd like to support the work we do here at Gird Up, consider a cup of coffee donation. Go to www.girdupministries.com, select buy us a cup of coffee, and help us flood the internet with confessional content. And if you've got questions, topics, or guest ideas, send them my way through the link in the show notes. I love you. God bless you. And we'll talk to you next week.